I'm asking for forgiveness and mercy too. I want to live, and I'm very ashamed and very sorry about what I did. Please live. Please let me live.
Clemency is denied for Wanda Allen. The state of Oklahoma will now adjourn for the day. The time is now 3:00 p.m.
On the evening of January 11, 2001, inside the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAllister, Wanda Allen lay strapped to a gurney. At exactly 9:21 p.m., the state of Oklahoma carried out her execution by lethal injection. She was 42 years old, the first black woman executed in the United States in nearly half a century. Her name would forever be etched into the fraught history of the death penalty in America. The irony was profound. Allen's life had been shaped by poverty, abuse, and neurological damage that went largely unnoticed during her trial. Psychologists later confirmed that she suffered from brain impairments and limited intellectual functioning, yet none of this was presented to the jury that sentenced her to death. To some, she was a cold-blooded killer who had taken not one, but 2 lives. To others, she was a broken woman, failed by the very systems meant to protect her. As the lethal chemicals coursed through her veins, Wanda whispered her final prayer, "Father, forgive them. They know not what they do." Her journey from neglected child to condemned prisoner had taken 4 decades, a path marked by abusive relationships, cycles of violence, and 2 fatal shootings. But Wanda story was not hers alone. 3 lives had collided in the volatile storm of love, betrayal, and rage that culminated in the parking lot of an Oklahoma City police station in December 1988. Gloria Leathers, a 29-year-old woman, was the second partner whose relationship with Allen ended in death. She had sought safety in the presence of law enforcement, believing the walls of the police station could protect her. Instead, she stepped outside into the path of a bullet fired by the woman she once loved. Dedra Pettis, the first victim, had been only 29 when a heated argument with Allen ended in a gunshot years earlier. Though Allen pleaded manslaughter and served only 4 years, that act foreshadowed the tragedy yet to come. And at the center of it all was Wanda Allen herself, a woman whose early life was scarred by neglect, abuse, and undiagnosed brain damage. She carried the weight of trauma and poverty, but also a history of violence that made her both a victim and an aggressor. 3 women bound together by love and destruction. 2 dead, 1 executed. Their intersecting stories would ignite fierce debate over justice, mercy, and the role of race, gender, sexuality, and mental health in America's death penalty system. The case would draw the attention of civil rights leaders, LGBTQ advocates, and Amnesty International. Pleas for clemency came from across the world, yet they fell silent against the backdrop of Oklahoma's unyielding stance on capital punishment. But to understand how a troubled child from Oklahoma City became one of the most controversial figures on death row, how a toxic love story ended in the shadow of a police station, and why her execution still resonates in debates about justice and mercy, we have to go back. Back to 1959. Back to a childhood defined by poverty and violence. Back to the beginnings of Wanda Allen's descent into tragedy. If you're drawn to stories of justice, betrayal, and the people who reach a point of no return, make sure to subscribe to No Way Out. This is where true crime meets truth. Real cases, real consequences. The darkest corners of human decision, broken down into tiny pieces so you can see every detail and make your own conclusions better. In August 17, 1959, Oklahoma City, a baby girl entered the world as the second of what would become 8 children. Wanda Allen was born into a family where survival meant more than just getting by. Her father, William Allen, worked when he could find jobs. Her mother, Mary Ballard, carried the weight of an addiction that would shape every pregnancy. Mary drank throughout each of her 8 pregnancies, never stopping even when carrying her children. The Allen family lived in public housing on the east side of Oklahoma City. The apartments were cramped, the walls thin, and the utilities often cut off. When William learned that Mary was pregnant with their 8th child, something inside him broke. The responsibility of feeding so many mouths with so little income became too much. After the youngest child was born, William Allen walked out the door and never returned. Mary was left alone with 8 children under the age of 18. The family survived on welfare checks and food stamps that never seemed to stretch far enough. Wanda Jean, being the second oldest, quickly learned that childhood was a luxury she couldn't afford. At 10 years old, she was already responsible for watching her younger siblings while Mary struggled with her drinking. The older children often went to bed hungry so the little ones could eat. The neighborhood where they lived was tough. Drug dealers worked the corners, and violence was common. Children learned to stay inside after dark, and even daytime wasn't always safe. Wanda Jean watched her mother's health decline as the alcohol took its toll. Mary couldn't hold down steady work, making their financial situation even more desperate. School became Wanda Jean's escape, but even there, challenges followed her. Her clothes were worn and too small. She often came to class hungry. Teachers noticed her struggling to concentrate, but no one connected her difficulties to what was happening at home. The apartment building where they lived housed other struggling families. Children from broken homes filled the hallways. Some found trouble early, getting involved with older kids who had already given up on legitimate paths to success. Wanda Jean tried to protect her younger siblings from the worst of their situation. She would steal food from grocery stores when the welfare money ran out. She took on odd jobs in the neighborhood, cleaning houses or running errands for a few dollars. The absence of their father created a void that affected each child differently. Some withdrew completely, while others acted out in school. Wanda Jean fell somewhere in between, trying to be strong for her family while dealing with her own emotional needs. By age 11, Wanda Jean had learned that the world was not fair. She had seen her mother cry herself to sleep more times than any child should witness. She had gone to school with bruises from fights over food or money. She had watched neighbors get arrested, seen ambulances take away overdose victims, and heard gunshots in the night. The stress of poverty weighed heavily on the entire family. Mary's drinking worsened as the years passed, making her less capable of caring for her children. Wanda Jean found herself taking on more adult responsibilities, including making sure her siblings got to school and had something to eat. But the worst was yet to come. The trauma that would define Wanda Jean's future was approaching rapidly, and neither she nor her family could have prepared for what would happen when she turned 12 years old. Wanda Jean Allen was 12 years old when her life took a turn that would alter her brain chemistry forever. It was a typical afternoon in Oklahoma City, with children playing in the streets while adults sat on porches trying to escape the heat. Wanda Jean was walking home from a neighbor's house where she had been babysitting for 50 cents. The money would help buy milk for her younger siblings. She was thinking about homework she needed to finish when she stepped into the intersection near her apartment building. The pickup truck hit her at full speed. The driver had been drinking and never saw the small girl crossing the street. Wanda Jean's body flew through the air and landed hard on the asphalt. Witnesses said she didn't move for several minutes. When the ambulance arrived, Wanda Jean was unconscious. Her head had struck the pavement with tremendous force. The paramedics worked quickly to stabilize her before rushing to the hospital. Her mother, Mary, received the call at home and immediately began crying. At the hospital, doctors discovered serious head trauma. Wanda Jean remained unconscious for hours while medical staff monitored her condition. The impact had caused swelling in her brain, and doctors worried about permanent damage. Mary Allen sat by her daughter's bedside, praying and making promises to God that she would stop drinking if Wanda Jean survived. The other children waited at home with a neighbor, not fully understanding why their sister hadn't come back from babysitting. When Wanda Jean finally woke up, she seemed different. Her speech was slower, and she had trouble remembering simple things. Doctors explained to Mary that head injuries in children could have lasting effects, but they couldn't predict exactly what problems might develop over time. The family had no insurance and couldn't afford extensive medical testing. After 3 days in the hospital, Wanda Jean was sent home with basic instructions for care. No one mentioned the need for psychological evaluation or long-term monitoring of her cognitive development. Back at home, Wanda Jean struggled to keep up with schoolwork that had been easy before the accident. Her teachers noticed the change, but assumed she was just going through a difficult phase. No one connected her academic problems to the head injury. Mary did stop drinking for several weeks after the accident, but the stress of caring for 8 children with no income eventually led her back to alcohol. The family's financial situation remained desperate, and Wanda Jean's medical needs added to their burden. 2 years after the truck accident, when Wanda Jean was 14, another violent incident would compound her brain damage. She was walking through her neighborhood when she got into an argument with another teenager over something trivial. The fight escalated quickly. The other girl pulled out a knife and stabbed Wanda Jean in the left temple. The blade penetrated her skull, causing additional damage to brain tissue that was still recovering from the previous injury. This time, the hospital stay was shorter because the family couldn't afford extended treatment. Doctors stitched up the wound and sent Wanda Jean home with antibiotics. No one performed comprehensive neurological testing to assess the combined impact of both injuries. The stabbing left Wanda Jean with a visible scar on her temple and invisible damage that would affect her decision-making abilities for the rest of her life. The left hemisphere of her brain, responsible for logical thinking and impulse control, had been severely compromised. At age 15, psychological testing revealed that Wanda Jean's IQ had dropped to 69, placing her just within the range of mental retardation. The examining doctor recommended immediate neurological assessment and specialized educational support. However, the recommendations were never followed. The family couldn't afford private testing, and the public school system was already overwhelmed with students who had greater visible needs. Wanda Jean fell through the cracks of a system that wasn't designed to help children like her. By 17, Wanda Jean had dropped out of high school. Her brain damage made it nearly impossible to focus on academic subjects, and her family needed her to work to help pay bills. She found herself drawn to older teenagers who accepted her despite her limitations. These relationships would soon lead Wanda Jean down a path toward violence that her damaged brain was ill-equipped to navigate. The foundations for tragedy had been laid, and the first victim was already in her life. That first victim was someone Wanda Jean had known since childhood. Dedra Pettis grew up just 3 blocks from Wanda Jean Allen in the same struggling neighborhood of Oklahoma City. Born in 1959, she was exactly the same age as Wanda Jean and faced many of the same challenges that came with poverty. Dedra's family situation was slightly more stable than the Allens. Her parents stayed together, and her father maintained steady employment at a local factory. However, money was still tight, and Dedra learned early that she would need to be tough to survive in their neighborhood. The 2 girls met at elementary school and quickly became friends. They shared similar experiences of going to bed hungry and wearing clothes that had been passed down through multiple families. Both understood what it meant to have electricity shut off or to stretch a box of cereal for 3 days. Dedra was known for her quick temper and willingness to fight anyone who disrespected her or her friends. She was small in stature but had earned a reputation for being fearless. Teachers at their school often had to separate Dedra from other students when arguments turned physical. As they grew older, Wanda Jean and Dedra's friendship deepened beyond the typical bonds formed in childhood. By their teenage years, their relationship had become romantic, though they kept this aspect private due to the conservative attitudes in their community. After Wanda Jean dropped out of high school, she and Dedra decided to move in together. They found a small apartment on Lincoln Boulevard that they could barely afford by combining their part-time wages from various jobs in the neighborhood. Living together brought new stresses to their relationship. Both young women had short tempers and limited skills for resolving conflicts peacefully. Their arguments often became loud and sometimes physical, with neighbors occasionally calling police to break up their fights. Dedra worked at a local diner, serving coffee and hamburgers to truck drivers and factory workers. The job paid minimum wage, but tips helped her contribute to their rent and groceries. She often came home exhausted and frustrated by customers who treated her poorly. Wanda Jean struggled to maintain employment due to her cognitive limitations. Employers would hire her for simple tasks, but her brain damage made it difficult for her to follow complex instructions or work independently. She was fired from several jobs within weeks of starting. The financial pressure created constant tension between them. Dedra resented having to carry most of the financial burden, while Wanda Jean felt frustrated by her inability to contribute equally. Their arguments became more frequent and more intense as months passed. Friends and neighbors noticed that both women seemed to escalate conflicts rather than trying to resolve them peacefully. When Dedra felt disrespected, she would become verbally aggressive. When Wanda Jean felt cornered or confused, her damaged brain would trigger fight-or-flight responses that often led to violence. Despite these problems, they continued living together because neither could afford rent alone. Their relationship had become codependent, with each woman relying on the other for emotional and financial support while simultaneously creating stress for each other. By early 1981, their arguments had begun involving Dedra's male friends, particularly one young man who spent considerable time at their apartment. Wanda Jean felt threatened by his presence and suspected that Dedra was developing feelings for him. The jealousy and paranoia that would characterize Wanda Jean's future relationships were already evident in her interactions with Dedra. She would become agitated when Dedra spoke to other people and would sometimes follow her to work to make sure she wasn't meeting someone else. Dedra began talking about moving out and ending their relationship. She told friends that Wanda Jean's behavior was becoming too controlling and that she feared what might happen if their arguments continued to escalate. On June 29, 1981, Dedra decided to have a serious conversation with Wanda Jean about their future. She had made up her mind to move out of their shared apartment and start fresh somewhere else. She planned to tell Wanda Jean that their relationship was over. Neither woman could have predicted that this conversation would end with one of them dead and the other beginning a journey through the criminal justice system that would ultimately lead to the execution chamber 20 years later. That fateful morning started like any other day at the Lincoln Boulevard apartment. The Oklahoma summer heat was already building by mid-morning, and both women were dealing with the stress of unpaid bills and relationship problems. But this day would be different from all the others. The conversation began calmly enough. Dedra explained that she felt their relationship had become unhealthy and that she needed space to figure out her own life. She talked about finding her own place and maybe getting a better job in a different part of the city. Wanda Jean's reaction was immediate and intense. Her brain damage made it difficult for her to process rejection or abandonment, and Dedra's words triggered a panic response that she couldn't control. She began crying and begging Dedra to reconsider. As the argument continued, Wanda Jean became more agitated. She followed Dedra around the apartment, demanding explanations and making promises to change. Dedra tried to remain calm, but Wanda Jean's behavior was making her nervous. The situation escalated when Dedra mentioned that she had been talking to her male friend about getting help moving her belongings. Wanda Jean became convinced that Dedra was leaving her for this man, and her jealousy transformed into rage. At some point during the argument, Wanda Jean retrieved a handgun that she kept in the apartment for protection. She later claimed that she only intended to scare Dedra into staying, but her damaged brain couldn't calculate the consequences of her actions. When Dedra saw the gun, she tried to leave the apartment immediately. This action triggered Wanda Jean's fight-or-flight response, and she fired a single shot. The bullet struck Dedra in the chest, causing massive internal bleeding. Wanda Jean immediately realized what she had done and called for an ambulance. She held Dedra while waiting for paramedics, crying and apologizing repeatedly. By the time medical help arrived, Dedra had lost too much blood to survive. Police arrived shortly after the ambulance and found Wanda Jean sitting next to Dedra's body, still holding the gun. She was in shock and kept repeating that she hadn't meant for this to happen. Officers took the weapon and placed Wanda Jean under arrest. During police questioning, Wanda Jean's story changed multiple times. Her brain damage affected her ability to provide consistent information, and investigators had difficulty determining exactly what had happened in the apartment. Initially, Wanda Jean claimed that she had fired the gun in self-defense when Dedra's boyfriend attacked her. She said the shooting was accidental and occurred during a struggle for the weapon. However, physical evidence at the scene didn't support this version of events. Forensic examination revealed that Dedra had been shot at close range, and powder burns on her clothing indicated that the gun had been fired from just a few feet away. There were also bruises on Dedra's body that suggested she had been physically assaulted before being shot. The medical examiner concluded that Dedra had been beaten and then shot execution style. The evidence contradicted Wanda Jean's claim of self-defense and suggested premeditated murder. However, prosecutors faced challenges in building their case. Wanda Jean's mental limitations made it difficult to determine her intent, and there were no witnesses to the actual shooting. Her inconsistent statements could be explained by brain damage rather than deliberate deception. After several months of legal negotiations, prosecutors offered Wanda Jean a plea deal. She could plead guilty to manslaughter instead of murder and receive a 4-year prison sentence. Her court-appointed attorney recommended accepting the deal. Wanda Jean pleaded guilty to manslaughter in the death of Dedra Pettis and was sentenced to 4 years in the Oklahoma Department of Corrections. She would serve only 2 years of this sentence before being released on parole in 1983. During her time in prison, Wanda Jean received no treatment for her brain damage or psychological issues. She was housed in the general population and expected to follow the same rules as other inmates despite her cognitive limitations. It was during this incarceration that Wanda Jean would meet another troubled young woman named Gloria Leathers, setting the stage for an even more tragic relationship. Women's facilities housed inmates with various backgrounds in crimes, from drug offenses to violent felonies. Gloria Jean Leathers was among those serving time for manslaughter, having been convicted in a case involving the death of another woman. Like Wanda Jean, Gloria had grown up in poverty and had learned to survive through toughness and violence when necessary. The two women met in the prison cafeteria during Wanda Jean's first week of incarceration. Gloria was already established among the inmates and had a reputation for being someone who could protect herself and others from the dangers that existed within the prison walls. Wanda Jean was struggling to adapt to prison life. Her brain damage made it difficult for her to understand and follow the complex social rules that governed inmate relationships. She often found herself confused by situations that other prisoners navigated easily. Gloria took notice of Wanda Jean's vulnerabilities and initially offered protection in exchange for commissary items or other small favors. This type of arrangement was common in the prison, where stronger inmates often formed protective relationships with weaker ones. Over time, their relationship evolved beyond simple protection. Gloria recognized that Wanda Jean was different from other inmates and required more care and guidance. Wanda Jean was grateful for Gloria's attention and began to depend on her for emotional support. Both women came from broken families and had experienced violence and abandonment throughout their lives. They found comfort in sharing their stories and understanding each other's pain. Their relationship became romantic, though they had to be discreet due to prison regulations. Gloria was scheduled to be released several months before Wanda Jean completed her sentence. She promised to wait for Wanda Jean and to help her find housing and employment when she got out of prison. During their time together in prison, Gloria learned about Wanda Jean's brain damage and cognitive limitations. She saw how other inmates sometimes took advantage of Wanda Jean's confusion and positioned herself as a protector and advocate. Wanda Jean became emotionally dependent on Gloria in ways that concerned some of the other inmates. She would become agitated when Gloria spent time with other people and would sometimes follow her around the prison like a lost child. Gloria enjoyed the feeling of being needed and important to someone, but she also recognized that Wanda Jean's attachment was becoming unhealthy. She tried to encourage Wanda Jean to develop other friendships and interests, but these efforts were largely unsuccessful. When Gloria was released from prison in late 1983, she kept her promise to wait for Wanda Jean. The separation was difficult for both women. Wanda Jean struggled with depression and anxiety during her final months in prison, while Gloria found herself missing the structure and routine that prison had provided. They maintained contact through letters and occasional visits, planning for their future together. Gloria painted a picture of the life they would build, with steady jobs and a stable home where they could both feel safe and loved. After her release from prison, Gloria worked various jobs in Oklahoma City while waiting for Wanda Jean to complete her sentence. She found employment at restaurants, cleaning services, and temporary agencies, always managing to earn enough money to pay rent and buy necessities. Gloria was also a mother. She had 3 children who were being raised by her mother, Ruby Wilson, while she served time in prison and tried to rebuild her life afterward. The separation from her children was a source of constant pain and motivation for her to stay out of trouble. When Wanda Jean was released and moved in with her, Gloria took on the role of caregiver and protector. She helped Wanda Jean find work, handled their finances, and managed their household affairs. In many ways, she became like a parent to someone who couldn't fully care for herself. However, Gloria had her own emotional needs that weren't being met in their relationship. Wanda Jean's brain damage made it difficult for her to provide the emotional support and intellectual companionship that Gloria craved. Gloria began to feel trapped by the responsibility of caring for someone who required constant supervision and guidance. She loved Wanda Jean, but struggled with the one-sided nature of their relationship. Initially, both women found employment and managed to pay their bills. Gloria worked at a local restaurant while Wanda Jean took on various part-time jobs that didn't require complex thinking or decision-making skills. However, the stresses of daily life quickly revealed fundamental problems in their relationship. Wanda Jean's brain damage made her extremely possessive and jealous. She would become agitated when Gloria spoke to coworkers, customers, or neighbors. Gloria found herself walking on eggshells, trying to avoid triggering Wanda Jean's explosive reactions. Simple interactions with other people became sources of conflict that could last for days. Their neighbors in the apartment complex began to recognize the pattern of their arguments. Loud shouting would come from their unit, followed by periods of tense silence, then more yelling. Sometimes these disputes would spill into the hallways or parking lot. Police were called to their address multiple times for domestic disturbances. Officers would arrive to find both women upset and blaming each other for the conflict. Since neither woman was seriously injured during these early incidents, police would simply document the complaints and leave. The Oklahoma City Police Department domestic violence protocols in the 1980s were limited compared to modern standards. Officers often treated these calls as private matters between consenting adults rather than recognizing patterns of escalating violence. Wanda Jean's behavior became increasingly controlling as months passed. She would follow Gloria to work, check up on her during breaks, and question her about every conversation she had with other people. Gloria tried to set boundaries, but Wanda Jean's damaged brain couldn't process rejection or criticism normally. What seemed like reasonable requests to Gloria felt like abandonment and betrayal to Wanda Jean. The cycle of violence in their relationship followed a predictable pattern. Tension would build over several days as Wanda Jean became more suspicious and possessive. This would lead to an argument that escalated into shouting and sometimes physical fighting. After these explosions, Wanda Jean would become apologetic and promise to change her behavior. Gloria would forgive her, and they would have a brief period of relative peace before the cycle began again. Friends and family members on both sides began expressing concern about the relationship. Gloria's mother, Ruby Wilson, urged her daughter to leave Wanda Jean and focus on rebuilding her relationship with her children. By 1987, their fights had begun involving other people. Wanda Jean would become jealous of Gloria's friendships and would sometimes confront people she perceived as threats to their relationship. Gloria began making plans to leave, but struggled with guilt about abandoning someone who clearly needed help and support. She knew that Wanda Jean had limited resources and few people who understood her special needs. The apartment complex where they lived eventually asked them to move due to noise complaints from other tenants. They found another place to live, but the change of location didn't improve their relationship dynamics. Throughout 1988, their arguments became more frequent and more intense. Gloria would sometimes stay at friends' houses to get away from Wanda Jean, which only increased Wanda Jean's paranoia and possessiveness. Wanda Jean began making threats about what she would do if Gloria left her permanently. These threats were sometimes directed at Gloria and sometimes at other people she blamed for encouraging Gloria to end their relationship. By late 1988, several people in their social circle had urged Gloria to seek help from domestic violence organizations or law enforcement. However, Gloria was reluctant to take formal action against someone she still cared about. The relationship had become a dangerous cycle that neither woman knew how to break. Gloria felt trapped by her own compassion and Wanda Jean's obvious vulnerability. Wanda Jean felt threatened by any suggestion that Gloria might leave her. On December 2, 1988, this toxic dynamic would finally reach its inevitable conclusion. December 2, 1988, began like many other days for Wanda Jean Allen and Gloria Leathers. Both women woke up in their Oklahoma City apartment with the weight of an increasingly troubled relationship hanging over them. Gloria had made a decision that she had been contemplating for months. She was going to end their relationship permanently and move out of their shared apartment. She had already spoken to her mother about staying with her while she found her own place. The morning passed without major incident, but tension filled the air. Wanda Jean sensed that something was different about Gloria's behavior. She seemed distant and preoccupied, which triggered Wanda Jean's anxiety about abandonment. Around midday, Gloria told Wanda Jean that she needed to go grocery shopping. This simple announcement would become the catalyst for the events that followed, though neither woman could have predicted how the day would end. At the grocery store, what started as routine shopping quickly escalated into a public argument. Wanda Jean became suspicious about why Gloria needed certain items and began questioning her about her plans. Other shoppers noticed the two women arguing in the aisles. Their voices grew louder as the disagreement continued, with Wanda Jean becoming increasingly agitated and Gloria trying to maintain her composure. Store employees eventually approached them and asked them to either resolve their dispute quietly or leave the premises. The public nature of their argument was making other customers uncomfortable. A police officer who happened to be in the area was called to intervene. He spoke with both women briefly and offered to escort them home to help them resolve their differences peacefully. The officer followed their car back to their apartment complex and waited while Gloria went inside to collect some personal belongings. He could see that both women were upset but didn't perceive any immediate danger. Inside the apartment, Gloria began packing clothes and personal items into bags. She told Wanda Jean that she was leaving for good and wouldn't be coming back. This announcement devastated Wanda Jean. Wanda Jean begged Gloria to reconsider, promising to change her behavior and attend counseling if necessary. She followed Gloria around the apartment, crying and pleading for another chance. As Gloria carried her bags toward the door, Wanda Jean's desperation turned to anger. She grabbed a garden rake that was stored on their patio and struck Gloria across the face with it, leaving a visible wound. Gloria reeled from the blow but continued toward her mother's car, which was waiting in the parking lot. Ruby Wilson had come to help her daughter move out and witnessed the assault with the rake. Both women got into Ruby Wilson's car and drove directly to the village police department to file a formal complaint against Wanda Jean for domestic violence. Gloria was bleeding from the rake injury and needed medical attention. Wanda Jean followed them to the police station in her own vehicle. She later claimed that she was trying to apologize and convince Gloria not to press charges, but her behavior suggested more troubling intentions. At the police station, Gloria and her mother went inside to speak with officers about filing charges. Wanda Jean remained in the parking lot, watching and waiting for them to come back outside. When Gloria emerged from the police station approximately 30 minutes later, Wanda Jean approached her near Ruby Wilson's car. Witnesses said Wanda Jean appeared to be concealing something under her sweatshirt. The confrontation was brief. Gloria was leaning into the car to retrieve her purse when Wanda Jean moved closer. Without warning, she pulled out a .38 caliber handgun and fired a single shot into Gloria's abdomen at close range. Ruby Wilson screamed as her daughter collapsed. 2 police officers inside the station heard the gunshot and rushed outside, but they arrived too late to prevent the shooting. Wanda Jean stood over Gloria's body, still holding the smoking gun. She appeared to be in shock, staring at what she had done. Officers quickly disarmed her and placed her under arrest. Gloria was rushed to a local hospital where surgeons worked frantically to save her life. The bullet had caused massive internal damage, and she had lost significant amounts of blood. For 3 days, Gloria fought for her life in intensive care, while Wanda Jean sat in jail awaiting formal charges. Ruby Wilson maintained a constant vigil at her daughter's bedside, praying for a miracle that never came. On December 5, 1988, Gloria Jean Leathers died from her injuries. Wanda Jean Allen was now facing murder charges that could result in the death penalty. The Oklahoma City Police Department immediately launched a homicide investigation into the shooting death of Gloria Leathers. Detective work began while Gloria was still fighting for her life in the hospital, that with investigators knowing that the case could become a capital murder prosecution. If you're finding this breakdown helpful so far, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. On No Way Out, we don't just skim the headlines. We dig into every detail of the crime, the trial, and the execution, so you get the full story. Drop a comment below, let us know where you're watching from, and share this video so more people can join the conversation. The crime scene at the Village Police Department presented both advantages and challenges for investigators. The shooting had occurred in front of a police station with multiple potential witnesses, but the emotional nature of the domestic violence situation complicated witness statements. Ruby Wilson provided the most crucial eyewitness testimony. She had watched her daughter being shot and could describe exactly what happened in the parking lot. Her account was clear and consistent from the moment she gave her first statement. Police officers who had been inside the station when the shot was fired could testify about hearing the gunshot, but none had actually witnessed the shooting itself. Their testimonies would be important for establishing timeline and circumstances. The investigation revealed that this wasn't the first time police had been called to address conflicts between Wanda Jean Allen and Gloria Leathers. Officers found multiple domestic disturbance reports filed over the previous several years. Forensic examination of the .38 caliber handgun used in the shooting showed that it had been fired at close range. Powder burns on Gloria's clothing indicated that the weapon was discharged from just a few feet away, contradicting any potential self-defense claims. The medical examiner's report detailed the extensive internal damage caused by the bullet. The shot had been fired with precision into Gloria's abdomen, causing injuries that made survival extremely unlikely, even with immediate medical intervention. During initial questioning, Wanda Jean provided confused and contradictory statements about what had happened. Her answers changed depending on how questions were phrased, making it difficult for investigators to determine her intent. Wanda Jean claimed that she had acted in self-defense because Gloria still had the garden rake and was threatening her with it. However, physical evidence at the scene showed that the rake was inside Ruby Wilson's car and hadn't been used as a weapon during the parking lot confrontation. Further investigation into Wanda Jean's background revealed her previous conviction for the manslaughter of Dedra Pettis in 1981. This information would become crucial for prosecutors seeking to establish a pattern of violence and justify pursuing the death penalty. Detectives interviewed friends and neighbors who had witnessed the turbulent relationship between Wanda Jean and Gloria. Many people described a pattern of escalating domestic violence with Wanda Jean as the primary aggressor. The investigation also uncovered evidence of stalking behavior. Several witnesses reported that Wanda Jean had followed Gloria to work, shown up at places where Gloria was spending time with friends, and made threatening statements about what she would do if Gloria left her. Police found written materials in Wanda Jean's apartment that suggested premeditation. There were threatening notes and messages that indicated she had been planning some type of violent action against Gloria, or people she blamed for encouraging Gloria to end their relationship. One piece of evidence that particularly concerned investigators was a postcard that Wanda Jean had sent to Gloria several weeks before the shooting. The front of the card showed a gorilla with the caption, "Patience my ass, I'm gonna kill something," and the back contained a threatening message. The postcard read, "Try and leave. You'll understand this card more, dig for real, no joke, love Jean." This evidence suggested that Wanda Jean had been planning violence in response to Gloria's attempts to leave their relationship. Ballistics testing confirmed that the gun used in the shooting belonged to Wanda Jean and had been legally purchased several months earlier. She had told the gun dealer that she needed the weapon for protection. But investigation showed no evidence that she had been threatened by anyone. The investigation also revealed concerning details about Wanda Jean's mental state in the weeks leading up to the shooting. Several people reported that her behavior had become increasingly erratic and paranoid. Psychological evaluation was ordered to determine Wanda Jean's competency to stand trial. But this assessment didn't uncover the full extent of her brain damage or cognitive limitations. The evaluation focused primarily on her ability to understand the charges against her, rather than examining underlying mental health issues. By the time investigators completed their work, they had built a strong case for first-degree murder. The evidence showed premeditation, a history of domestic violence, and clear intent to kill. Prosecutors felt confident that they could secure a conviction and began preparing to seek the death penalty. When formal charges were filed against Wanda Jean Allen, her family faced a crisis they were unprepared to handle. First-degree murder with the possibility of the death penalty required experienced legal representation that was far beyond their financial means. The Allen family scraped together what little money they had and approached Bob Carpenter, a local attorney who primarily handled routine criminal cases. They offered him $5,000 to represent Wanda Jean, believing that the case would likely be resolved with a manslaughter plea similar to her previous conviction. Bob Carpenter was a solo practitioner who had never handled a capital murder case in his career. When he agreed to represent Wanda Jean, he genuinely believed that prosecutors would offer a reasonable plea deal that would avoid the death penalty. The Allen family managed to make an initial payment of $800 to Carpenter and arranged to take out a second mortgage on their modest home to pay the remaining $4,200. This financial commitment represented an enormous sacrifice for a family that was already struggling with poverty. When prosecutors announced that they intended to seek the death penalty, Bob Carpenter realized that he was completely unprepared for the complexity of a capital case. He had no experience with the specialized legal procedures, expert witnesses, and extensive investigation required for death penalty defense. Carpenter immediately filed a motion asking the court to allow him to withdraw from the case. He explained to the judge that he lacked the experience and resources necessary to provide adequate representation in a capital murder trial. In his motion, Carpenter also requested that a public defender be appointed to serve as lead counsel, while he remained available as co-counsel without additional payment. This arrangement would have given Wanda Jean access to attorneys experienced in death penalty cases, while allowing Carpenter to fulfill his obligation to the family. The prosecution opposed Carpenter's motion to withdraw, arguing that he had already accepted payment and taken responsibility for the case. They claimed that allowing him to withdraw would cause unnecessary delays in the proceedings. The judge ultimately denied Carpenter's request to withdraw and refused to appoint a public defender to assist with the case. This decision forced an inexperienced attorney to handle one of the most complex types of criminal cases, with minimal resources and no specialized knowledge. The court's refusal to provide adequate counsel would later become a central issue in Wanda Jean's appeals. But at the time, there was little Carpenter could do except proceed with the case using whatever resources were available. With only $800 in total payment, Carpenter could not afford to hire investigators, expert witnesses, or consultants who might have uncovered crucial evidence about Wanda Jean's mental impairments. Capital cases typically require hundreds of thousands of dollars in preparation costs to be handled properly. Carpenter never ordered psychological testing that would have revealed the full extent of Wanda Jean's brain damage. He was unaware that she had suffered traumatic head injuries as a child, and that her IQ tested at 69, placing her in the range of mental retardation. The lack of investigation also meant that crucial evidence about Gloria Leathers' violent history was never properly developed. While Carpenter knew about her 1979 self-defense killing, he didn't have the resources to thoroughly investigate this incident or present it effectively to the jury. Court-appointed investigators were not provided, despite Carpenter's requests for assistance. He was expected to handle all aspects of case preparation himself while maintaining his other legal practice and trying to earn enough money to support his own family. The inequality of resources between prosecution and defense was stark. The state had unlimited access to investigators, forensic experts, and specialized prosecutors with years of capital case experience. Carpenter was working alone with no specialized knowledge and minimal funding. As the trial date approached, Carpenter recognized that he was failing to provide adequate representation, but felt trapped by the court's refusal to allow him to withdraw or receive assistance. He knew that Wanda Jean's life was at stake, but he lacked the tools necessary to mount an effective defense. The stage was set for a trial where a mentally impaired defendant would be represented by an inexperienced attorney with no resources while facing prosecutors seeking to execute her. This fundamental inequality would have devastating consequences for Wanda Jean Allen and would later be recognized as a violation of her constitutional rights. The trial of Wanda Jean Allen officially began in 1989 with a courtroom packed with family members from both sides and community members who had followed the case through local media coverage. The stakes couldn't have been higher, with Wanda Jean's life hanging in the balance. Jury selection proved challenging for defense attorney Bob Carpenter, who lacked experience in capital cases and the resources to conduct proper background investigations on potential jurors. He was forced to make crucial decisions about jury composition without the specialized knowledge that could mean the difference between life and death. The prosecution, led by experienced prosecutors, presented their case methodically and professionally. They had unlimited resources for investigation and expert witnesses, allowing them to build a comprehensive narrative about premeditated murder. Assistant Attorney General Sandra Howard opened the prosecution's case by describing Wanda Jean as a cold-blooded killer who had stalked and murdered Gloria Leathers in a calculated act of revenge. The prosecution painted a picture of a dangerous woman who couldn't control her violent impulses. The state's evidence included the threatening postcard that Wanda Jean had sent to Gloria, witness testimony about their turbulent relationship, and forensic evidence showing that Gloria had been shot at close range. Each piece of evidence was presented professionally and effectively. Carpenter's cross-examination of prosecution witnesses was ineffective due to his lack of experience and preparation. He failed to challenge key evidence or present alternative explanations for the events that led to Gloria's death. The prosecution also introduced extensive evidence about Wanda Jean's previous conviction for killing Dedra Pettis, arguing that this showed a pattern of violence against romantic partners. This evidence was devastating and effectively convinced the jury that Wanda Jean was likely to kill again. When it came time for the defense case, Carpenter's limitations became painfully obvious. He had no expert witnesses to testify about Wanda Jean's mental impairments, no investigators to uncover mitigating evidence, and no specialists to explain how brain damage might affect behavior and decision-making. Carpenter attempted to argue self-defense, claiming that Wanda Jean had shot Gloria because she feared for her own safety. However, he couldn't effectively counter the prosecution's evidence that Gloria had been unarmed when she was shot. The defense tried to introduce evidence about Gloria's 1979 killing of Sheila Marie Barker, arguing that this showed Gloria had a history of violence and that Wanda Jean had reason to fear her. However, the prosecution successfully objected to this evidence on hearsay grounds. Without the ability to present Gloria's violent history, Carpenter couldn't establish that Wanda Jean's fear was reasonable or that she had acted in self-defense. This crucial evidence might have changed the outcome of the trial if it had been properly investigated and presented. Most importantly, Carpenter never discovered or presented evidence about Wanda Jean's brain damage and cognitive limitations. The jury never learned that she had an IQ of 69, that she had suffered traumatic head injuries as a child, or that her ability to understand consequences and control impulses was severely compromised. The prosecution took advantage of Wanda Jean's limitations by repeatedly emphasizing her sexual orientation and using stereotypes about lesbian relationships. They portrayed her as the dominant, aggressive partner who controlled Gloria through intimidation and violence. Carpenter lacked the knowledge and resources to effectively counter these prejudicial arguments. He couldn't explain how Wanda Jean's brain damage made her vulnerable to emotional manipulation, or how her cognitive limitations affected her behavior in relationships. During the penalty phase of the trial, the prosecution argued that Wanda Jean should receive the death penalty because she had previously been convicted of a violent felony and posed a continuing threat to society. They claimed that her history of violence against romantic partners made her too dangerous to live. The defense presentation during the penalty phase was minimal and ineffective. Carpenter called a few family members to testify about Wanda Jean's character, but he couldn't present expert testimony about her mental impairments or explain how proper treatment might have prevented the tragedy. The jury deliberated for several hours before returning with a guilty verdict on first-degree murder. They found two aggravating circumstances: Wanda Jean's previous violent felony conviction and the likelihood that she would commit future acts of violence. During the sentencing phase, the same jury that had convicted Wanda Jean was asked to decide whether she should live or die. Without any evidence about her mental limitations or brain damage, they voted to sentence her to death. Wanda Jean Allen arrived on death row at the Mabel Bassett Correctional Center in 1989, becoming one of only a handful of women facing execution in the United States. She was 30 years old and would spend the next 12 years fighting for her life through the appeals process. The transition to death row was particularly difficult for someone with Wanda Jean's cognitive limitations. The isolation, complex legal procedures, and constant threat of execution created overwhelming stress for a person whose brain damage made it difficult to process such situations. Death row inmates in Oklahoma during this period were housed in single cells for 23 hours per day, with limited access to recreation, education, or meaningful human contact. For Wanda Jean, who required social interaction and guidance to function effectively, this environment was especially harsh. During her early years on death row, Wanda Jean struggled to understand the legal proceedings that would determine whether she lived or died. The appeals process involved complex constitutional arguments and procedural requirements that were challenging even for educated defendants. It wasn't until 1991, 2 years after her conviction, that competent appellate attorneys finally uncovered the truth about Wanda Jean's mental impairments. Stephen Presson and his team from the Oklahoma Indigent Defense System began investigating her background and discovered evidence that should have been presented at trial. The investigation revealed that Wanda Jean had been tested for intellectual disability at age 15 and found to have an IQ of 69. The examining psychologist had placed her just within the range of mental retardation and had recommended neurological assessment due to symptoms of brain damage. Further investigation uncovered the traumatic head injuries that Wanda Jean had suffered as a child. The appellate team also discovered that the state had generated psychiatric reports showing Wanda Jean's mental impairments, but had never disclosed these reports to her trial attorney. This constituted prosecutorial misconduct and a violation of her right to due process. During her time on death row, Wanda Jean underwent a religious conversion and became a devout Christian. She found comfort in prayer and Bible study, though some observers questioned whether her newfound faith was genuine or calculated to improve her chances during the clemency process. Reverend Robin Myers of the Mayflower Congregational Church in Oklahoma City became her spiritual advisor and one of her strongest advocates. He argued that executing someone with such severe mental limitations would be both morally wrong and unconstitutional. The appeals process moved slowly through state and federal courts, with each level of review rejecting Wanda Jean's claims. Courts acknowledged that her trial attorney had been inadequate, but ruled that this didn't meet the legal standard for overturning her conviction. The timing of Wanda Jean's case was particularly unfortunate because attitudes toward executing mentally impaired defendants were beginning to change. Several states had passed laws prohibiting such executions, and the issue was moving toward eventual resolution by the Supreme Court. In 2000, her appellate team filed a clemency petition with the Oklahoma Pardon and Parole Board, presenting all the evidence about her mental impairments that had never been heard during her trial. They argued that executing someone with her limitations would violate evolving standards of human decency. The clemency petition also highlighted the inadequate legal representation that Wanda Jean had received, noting that her trial attorney had been paid only $800 and had no experience with capital cases. They argued that she had been denied her constitutional right to effective assistance of counsel. As her execution date approached, Wanda Jean's case attracted national attention from civil rights organizations, religious groups, and death penalty opponents. They argued that her case exemplified everything wrong with capital punishment in America. Despite overwhelming evidence that justice had not been served in her case, the appeals process was nearing its end. Wanda Jean Allen was about to become a test case for whether the American legal system would execute someone whose mental impairments should have protected her from the death penalty. By December 2000, Wanda Jean Allen's legal appeals had been exhausted through both state and federal courts. Her only remaining hope for avoiding execution was a clemency hearing before the Oklahoma Pardon and Parole Board, a process that had never resulted in a commuted death sentence in the state's history. The clemency petition prepared by her appellate team was comprehensive and devastating in its implications. It detailed how Wanda Jean had been sentenced to death without the jury ever learning about her brain damage, cognitive limitations, or the inadequate legal representation she had received. The case also attracted attention from religious leaders who argued that executing Wanda Jean would be morally wrong, regardless of the legal technicalities. They pointed to her religious conversion and the forgiveness offered by Gloria Leathers' mother as evidence that mercy was appropriate. Ruby Wilson, who had witnessed her daughter's murder, publicly stated that she had forgiven Wanda Jean and did not want her executed. This powerful testimony from the victim's mother provided moral weight to the clemency arguments. The clemency hearing was scheduled for December 15, 2000, at the Lexington Assessment and Reception Center. Interest in the case was so high that the facility reached its maximum capacity of 181 people, with dozens more turned away by prison officials. The defense team presented extensive evidence about Wanda Jean's cognitive limitations and the inadequate legal representation she had received. They argued that if the jury had known about her brain damage, they would have chosen life imprisonment instead of death. However, the composition of the Oklahoma Pardon and Parole Board made clemency extremely unlikely. 3 of the 5 members had been appointed by Governor Frank Keating, who was a strong supporter of the death penalty and had overseen more executions than any previous Oklahoma governor. When Wanda Jean was given an opportunity to address the board, she made an emotional plea for her life. She asked Gloria Leathers' family for forgiveness and begged the board to please let me live. Her words were simple but heartfelt, reflecting her limited ability to articulate complex thoughts. The prosecution countered the clemency arguments by emphasizing Wanda Jean's history of violence and claiming that she was not mentally retarded. They argued that she had graduated from high school and received vocational training, demonstrating her mental competence. However, the prosecution's claims about Wanda Jean's education were false. She had actually dropped out of high school at age 17 due to her cognitive limitations. The board was misinformed about her educational background, which became crucial to later legal arguments. After hearing several hours of testimony, the board voted 3-1 against recommending clemency to Governor Keating. Susan Bussey was the only member to vote in favor of sparing Wanda Jean's life, making her the only board member in Oklahoma history to ever vote for clemency in a capital case. The denial of clemency meant that Wanda Jean's fate now rested entirely in the hands of Governor Frank Keating, who had the constitutional authority to grant clemency regardless of the board's recommendation. However, Keating had never commuted a death sentence during his time in office. As January 11th approached, Governor Frank Keating faced increasing pressure from multiple directions. Death penalty opponents urged him to commute the sentence, while victims, rights advocates, and law enforcement officials supported proceeding with the execution. The Allen family prepared for the worst while holding on to hope that Governor Keating might intervene at the last minute. They had watched Wanda Jean struggle with her limitations throughout her life and believed that executing her would be fundamentally wrong. Ruby Wilson, Gloria Leathers' mother, maintained her position that she did not want Wanda Jean executed. Her forgiveness and opposition to the death penalty created a powerful moral argument against proceeding with the execution. On January 10th, the day before the scheduled execution, Jesse Jackson led a protest at the Mabel Bassett Correctional Center where Wanda Jean was housed. The demonstration was intended to draw final attention to the case and pressure Governor Keating to grant clemency. Jackson and 29 other protesters were arrested for trespassing when they refused to leave the prison grounds. Jackson spent the night in jail as a form of civil disobedience, highlighting his commitment to preventing what he saw as a grave injustice. The arrest of such a prominent civil rights leader generated additional media coverage and put more pressure on Oklahoma officials. However, it also demonstrated the limits of protest in changing the outcome of death penalty cases once the legal process had been exhausted. As January 11th dawned, it became clear that Governor Keating would not intervene to save Wanda Jean Allen's life. The stage was set for Oklahoma to execute its first woman since achieving statehood, despite overwhelming evidence that justice had not been served in her case. January 11th, 2001, began with Wanda Jean Allen's legal team making desperate last-minute appeals to federal courts, hoping for a miracle that would save her life. Stephen and David Presson had worked through the night, exploring every possible legal avenue to prevent the execution. Governor Frank Keating met with Jesse Jackson and Attorney General Drew Edmondson separately before making his final decision about clemency. Jackson made one last passionate argument for sparing Wanda Jean's life, emphasizing her mental limitations and the religious conversion that had transformed her during her years on death row. The meeting between Jackson and Keating was described as cordial but tense. Jackson argued that executing someone with Wanda Jean's cognitive limitations would be barbaric and would damage Oklahoma's reputation. Keating listened respectfully, but remained committed to allowing the execution to proceed. At approximately 1 p.m., Governor Keating announced his decision to deny Wanda Jean's request for a 30-day stay of execution. In his statement, Keating acknowledged the difficulty of the decision, but emphasized his belief in the rule of law and the justice system's verdict. Keating stated, "This is not easy because I am dealing with a fellow human being, with a fellow Oklahoman. I care very deeply for the victims of crime. I have no use for killers, but I have a deep and abiding faith in the rule of law." The governor's decision meant that Wanda Jean's only remaining hope lay with federal courts, which had already rejected multiple appeals. Her legal team filed emergency petitions with the 10th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals and prepared for a possible final appeal to the Supreme Court. At 7:30 p.m., the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals unanimously denied Wanda Jean's final appeal by a 3-0 vote. Inside the prison, Wanda Jean spent her final hours meeting with her spiritual advisor, Reverend Robin Myers, and saying goodbye to family members. She appeared calm and resigned to her fate, finding comfort in her religious faith. 24 relatives of both victims, Gloria Leathers and Dedra Pettis, traveled to McAllister to witness the execution. Many of them watched from behind a tinted window in the witness room, finally seeing justice carried out after years of waiting. At approximately 9 p.m., Wanda Jean was transferred from her holding cell to the execution chamber. She was strapped to the gurney while medical personnel prepared the intravenous lines that would deliver the lethal chemicals. When given an opportunity to make a final statement, Wanda Jean spoke clearly, "Father, forgive them, they know not what they do." Her words echoed those attributed to Jesus Christ during his crucifixion, reflecting the religious faith that had sustained her during her final years. Before the execution began, Wanda Jean smiled at her appellate attorney, David Presson, and stuck out her tongue playfully, a gesture that reflected her childlike personality even in these final moments. Presson later described her as dancing on the mattress while they tried to kill her. The lethal injection began at 9:15 p.m., with the administration of sodium pentothal to render Wanda Jean unconscious. This was followed by pancuronium bromide to stop her breathing and potassium chloride to stop her heart. Wanda Jean Allen was pronounced dead at 9:21 p.m. on January 11, 2001. She became the first African-American woman executed in the United States since 1954 and the first woman executed in Oklahoma since statehood in 1907. Family members of the victims expressed relief that the long legal process had finally concluded. Latoya Leathers, Gloria's daughter, stated, "We're the victims, not Wanda Jean. We are the victims, and justice has been served." However, the execution also drew criticism from many observers who believed that fundamental injustices in Wanda Jean's case had never been adequately addressed. Her death would be remembered not as the end of a criminal case, but as the beginning of broader discussions about mental capacity and the death penalty. Wanda Jean Allen's story raises difficult questions about justice, accountability, and the death penalty. Was this a case of a repeat violent offender finally facing consequences, or was it a woman failed by her defense, her health, and a system that did not see the whole picture? What do you think? Was justice served, or was it denied? Drop your thoughts in the comments, let us know where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe to No Way Out. This is where real cases meet real consequences, and we break them down piece by piece so you can decide for yourself.